We're nearing the completion of our code alongs. So let's continue with our exercises. In this exercise, we're given, again, a table or a data frame, and we have to convert the value that's stored in grade from a float to an integer. Remember how in our previous videos we talked about data types, right? So we have integers, floats, booleans, lists, and there's many more. In this case, we have to convert, this grade that's stored as a float or a decimal. It's represented as a float, and we can uh, easily tell that from the decimal value, right? And we want to convert it to a whole number. We want to just have it as an integer. So how would we go about doing this? First of all, let's create our uh, data frame very quickly. I'm going to call it grade data and open square brackets and then close square brackets. We only have 2 rows, so I'm going to just create 2 lists. Remember, in the last list, you're not adding a comma, okay? It's only in between lists that we add commas. So the first value is 1, then we have a name of Ava, and our second value is 6, third, and then our fourth value is 73.0. For the second row, we have 2, the name is Kate, who is 15 years old and received an 87.0 as their grade. So that's our data. I'm quickly going to create the columns for this as well. Again, remember that's a list. You can open it and close it. First column name is called student ID, and then it's called name, and then age, and then grade. And I'm going to continue with this naming convention of df, but since we already use df, I'm just going to call it df underscore 2, okay? And I'll store our data frame in this df underscore 2 variable. So our data is grade data, and our columns is grade data columns. If I run this and I check our table quickly, oops, it's very similar to this data frame, which is our input. And we want to convert the floats to integers, and specifically focusing in on the grade column. So before I even start that, how do we know what is the data type for each column, right? So there's a very simple way to do that. You first write your data frame, right? The variable in which it's stored. And then you write dot d types. Notice how this turned blue, similar to data frame. So it's sort of a special function. If I run this, I get 2 columns. One has the name of each column in this data frame 2 variable, and the second is its data type. You can sort of, disregard the 64. It basically means that this is a data type that can hold an integer of 64 bits. It's not that important to know, but we also have data types that are integer 128, 256, etc., right? The name, it's a string, but Python calls, when we use this dtypes thing, it calls it an object, right? By default. And we can change it to a string, that's not a problem. Age, it makes sense that this is an integer, and the grade is a float. And it really comes from this using the decimals, right? And what we're tasked to do is to convert it from a float to an integer, and specifically this grade column. So we're going to, talk about the same things we did last time, where we focus in on one column. And the way to really do that is by using these open square brackets, and then you can write the name of the column you want to focus in on, right? And now we want to update or do some sort of computation on it. If I scroll up and I look at our salary exercise, I focused in on the salary column, and then I did some sort of computation to it and set the new value equal to, you know, to that. So again, we're going to do something similar. We're focusing in on the grade column, and then for each value in the grade column, we're going to change its type from float to integer. And there's a special function for that in Python. You can use this thing called as type, and then inside your brackets, you put int in this case, since we have to convert it to integers. So if I run this, something happened in the background. Let me check our table again. Notice how the grades have been rounded now to whole numbers. We don't see any decimals. If I check the data type for each column now, right? Notice how the grade is also an integer. Previously, it was a float. So two things to remember here. We used something called .dtypes, right? To first check the data type of each column. And then we use the dot as type to change the data type for a specific column, right? So these are the two sort of functions we use to finish this exercise. One thing I want to say is I'll copy this code over, and if I want to change something to a float, right? If I want to change, say, the age column to a float, I'm simply going to update the column name to age, and I can, instead of writing an int here, I can write float. And if I run this, I can check the data type again for each column. Notice how the age is now a float. If I actually check the table, notice how age is now in decimals, right? So we can really use this to standardize the type for each column. And, it's really useful to do for integers and floats, because then we can run statistical computations on these data types. If something is an object or a string, right? We're not able to sort of check its standard deviation or check its average, right? Python will give you an error saying it cannot run this calculation on a string.